However you get to where you're going to get it.
Yeah.
The road doesn't matter, only the destination.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And,
Yeah,
you know,
it's
connecting with Andy opened up tons of doors for me as well. Like,
I'm
you
sure.
know, like his acting career ultimately has impacted my journey as well, you know. And
That's super cool.
through him I've gotten involved in causes that I had actually wanted to be part of for years, but wasn't able to because of circumstances like mental health and anti-bullying and more autism activism. You know, they're all causes that I wanted to be a part of for years, but I ended up getting to them because of Andy.
Well, people, you know, the universe and God put people in your life for a reason. There's no accidents. Make no mistake. There's no accidents. The only reason we got this done is because I met Max Martini doing a TV show here in Chicago, and we got to be friends. And you know, it all leads to something.
And listen, Mike happened to be the first guy I met when I walked through the doors in wrestling. The first day, he was the first guy I met, and you know, here we are, 25 years later.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, just you know, I used to ride not as a patch member, but I used to ride with outlaw clubs in Australia or club in Australia. But I was never a member, so I'm making that very clear. I was just really good friends with the guys. Now, you know, through my journey of whatever, part of the reason me and Doug started this are broken relationships, like, you know, a lot of broken relationships. And then my faith and riding with Bikers for Christ now, which is one of the world's biggest ministries. And it just changed my life. And then working with Doug. Doug gave me accolades then, thanks. But to be honest, I could talk to him till I'm black and blue. He did the work, not me. I just said, do this, and he did it. And he never, ever, ever gives up. And what's happening with this young kid now is that people are recognizing him in the street in Arizona going, are you that guy that does that YouTube thing, Relentless?
That's awesome, man. See?
Yeah, it's amazing.
But again, that's the you know, you guys gave each other the path.
The law of attraction, man. It's the law of attraction.
Super cool.
Yeah, 100%. Hey, Mike, I just got to ask you something. You mentioned about Max. What was his involvement in the Pacific Rim? Did he direct that or?
No, he played a character, and he actually played an Australian guy. So according to him, they hired an American guy and an English guy to play two Australian guys, and they hired a British guy to play an American guy.
Oh
so
my God!
It didn't make any sense at all. But yeah, he played the dad of one of the main characters in there. So
okay.
I forget his character name. They always, wherever Max and I are somewhere I'm with them, somebody always shouts it out. Oh, Hercules, Herc Hansen, that was his name in the movie.
Okay.
Yeah, Herc Hansen.
Well, the only reason I mentioned that is because it's on Netflix at the moment. I played one of the antagonists in the Pacific Rim, The Black, which is the animation of the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I actually played an Australian character. I had to work on my accent.
Your accent? Yeah.
It worked.
I auditioned for a part one time in Chicago, and they're like, could you do it with a Chicago accent? I'm like, I have a Chicago accent.
Hey, I got a question for you. So you two guys wrote this, right?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Yeah, and you were talking about the independent circuit. When I was watching the movie and those dressing rooms, and people who aren't aware might go, oh, I wonder. No, that's exactly how it was. Like,
listen, just having a dressing room.
And actually, it was a lot better than a lot of the ones we had, right, Andy?
I was about to say, if I could tell you the number of times that I got dressed in like a barn, you know, I mean, there were seriously some shady locker rooms, man. Like you, I remember showing up one time for a show, and I literally out in the middle of nowhere, driving in the Midwest, and there's nothing but corn. And all of a sudden, I look down about, you know, what seemed like a half a mile, and I see a ring elevated above the corn. And, you know, I mean,
there it is.
Some of the places we wrestled. Now, granted, we did a few, you know, arenas or civic centers or whatever you want to call them, but yeah, most of it was
fun too. You know, like you would.
Oh,
like some shows we travelled around Australia, and you come to this small country town, you'd hear the crickets and chirping, no one there, no one in the hall. And then 10 minutes before the show started, 300 people pour in.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It's like, oh, my God. And then other times you'd be at a show where there'd be 10 people there, and there was 10 people there, and that was it.
Those were the ones that I was like, I remember doing a couple of outdoor fairs, Wisconsin or Minnesota or something, and going out there and literally being 5 people out there and telling our opponent, let's get out of here. Let's get out of here.
I've been to more county
lost
fairs.
Andy.
Oh, no. Andy. There he is.
There he is. He's back.
I've been to more county fairs. My best story is I was on a 4-spot one weekend that took us to Columbus, Ohio, which is most people wouldn't know this, but Columbus, Ohio is the biggest city in Ohio.
Bigger than Cleveland?
It is. Yeah, Columbus it's the capital and it's the biggest city.
Oh, you learn something new every day.
The next day after Columbus, I think we were in a town like Richmond, Indiana, or somewhere that might have had 3,500 people in the whole town. And here's Columbus, Ohio, that's got 800,000 people. Let's call it. We had 44 people in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm pretty sure the entire town of Richmond, Indiana, showed up for the Richmond show. There were probably 2,500 people at this show. So you could never tell.
Back in the day, like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the urban areas were really big for professional wrestling. But after that, unless you were in WWF, the urban areas really weren't, at least in the States, weren't big for pro wrestling. You had to go to the rural areas, and that's where you really drew. And then, of course, once UFC came out, that sort of wrecked it, because then the cat was out of the bag on what was a shoot and what wasn't.
Great though. The beer garden crowds at the fairs were awesome, because you'd get all these guys who've been doing nothing but sucking down beers for 3 hours. And as a heel for the vast majority of my career, you had to have some thick skin going in there, baby, because those guys were ready. Any little thing they could pick out about you to hit you with, they were.
It's funny you bring that up, because we used to exactly what you said, rural towns, out in the open, and the thing I found really hard to do was when you're in an open fair, you're not in a building, you're outside. The atmosphere was so hard to get into.
Yeah, because the energy is not. It's not so collected, different. Totally. I didn't like outdoor shows. I still don't like outdoor shows. You lose the energy,
Yeah, there's something about a hall that just keeps the energy inside, It's completely different.
You're right. And it's like that thing about hardcore crowds. We wrestled in one of these hotels, a pub in South Australia, and it was like going to East LA, right? Wrestling in a place like that. So in the pubs there, you always had, back in the day, you had this guy, it was a bit of a culture, who was the top fighter, the top bluer. And he was, someone pointed him out and said, oh, that guy there, he's the guy who will drink, wait for a stranger to come in and check you out. And if you thought you're a bit of a mouth, he'd start pegging you out, right? Yeah. So my mate Danny used to wrestle in a mask, and Danny was huge. Like, he was a massive guy, but he was gentle. He never raised his voice. If he's going to hit you, you wouldn't even hear it coming out of his mouth. It'd just be bang, and you'd be down. He would never yell. And so he used to wrestle in black tights and his massive chest and arms and a black mask. So he's wrestling this guy, and next thing, this dude from the pubs right by the ring with a beer gun, you're a fairy, mate. And Danny ignored him, and he kept doing it. Every time Danny come to the ropes and bashing this other wrestler, he go, you're a fairy, mate. You're a fairy. And then Danny got a little sick of it, and next time he came over the ropes, he put the boot through and kicked him in the face, right? Just got him under the chin a little bit, accidentally, right?
Yeah, accidentally on purpose.
Oh, yeah, he wanted to get in the ring, but he didn't. Match finishes, Danny gets changed, and Danny goes and sits way down the back of the hall. Now, back in the day, we used to get little airline bags, and they were small. It's like a little tiny bag with the airline's name written on it. Now, Danny's got this bag with his mask in it and a couple other things. This tiny little bag. That's what he carried. So he's walking out to leave, and this guy comes up and shirt fronts him. Now, he's here and Danny's here, and he's gone, hey, mate, he goes, you really think you're that good? He said, this wrestling's all fake. And he goes, what are you going to do about it? And Danny said, look, I've got to go home. He said, I've done my job. I'm just, please leave me alone. And this guy's looking at this dude going, yeah. He said, you like I told you, mate, you're a fairy. And Danny goes, this is what he said. He goes, Andy, can you just hold my bag for a minute? I went, yeah. And he goes, come outside, we'll talk about it. I swear to God, he was back within 2 minutes. He said, thanks for holding that. I said, where is he? He goes, where do you think, mate? He goes,
on the floor
for an ambulance.
That's the shooter right there, baby.
You know,
that's the guy.
You know, sometimes some guys just they just can't let you go. And you know, I'm sure you have this experience too, Andy, working as a bouncer. I know, I mean, I did for many years. And a friend of mine used to have a saying, and he said, sometimes the guys are, you know, you'd have to say to them, well, if you must have it then. And then they never wanted it again. But it's like some guys want to try it. It's like, look, dude, I'm not standing here because I'm pretty, you know, I'm not, you know, and I'm not that big of a guy. So, you know, I got to be here for some other reason, maybe. And I do it every day. Like, what do you do for a living? Because this is what I do for a living. I do this for a living. So, you know, you might want to, you know, go back to
you're right with the heels in wrestling. Like, Frank used to tell us, like, stories when they were wrestling back in the day. He said there was times they literally had to fight their way out of the hall. Because the heels, like people hated them, and he said we literally fighting our way out to get to the bus to get out of there.
I can't say I ever fought my way out, but I had a couple times where they would put my jacket over the top of my head, and I'd run out to my car because guys were telling me I'll be waiting for you in the parking lot. Because I was one of those guys. You know, I'm not. You met me, Andy. I mean, I'm not a huge guy by any means. I was bigger when I wrestled, but my thing was just being mouthy and pissing people off. You know, because that's what you got to do when you're a heel in independent wrestling. And I'm telling you, you go to some of these towns and it was like, fucking dead, man. You know, and I'd be ducking out into my car.
I love, you know, I loved wrestling for the African American audiences in the city because they loved it. They didn't care who you were. They were really into it. But one time I made you know, as a heel, you're trying to get a rise, right? Trying to get heat. And so I made a snide comment that maybe I shouldn't have made. And, you know, and I did it in the heat of the moment. Of course, it was all acting. But afterwards, the security guys came up to me and said, you need to go home now. We're going to walk you to your car because they're conspiring. You know, they're going to get you in the parking lot. I was like, should I issue an apology or I don't know, you know, but sometimes being too good of a heel can backfire you on you too. When I worked with Roddy Piper once and he wore an armored leather jacket. And it was like 112 degrees in Chicago in July. And he's wearing this armored leather jacket. I go, bro, aren't you dying? He goes, no, man. He goes, I got stabbed a couple of times, you know, from overzealous fans.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, but this was, I mean, and this was later on when the cat was out of the bag, you know, when everybody knew it was a work. And Roddy goes, no, man. He goes, trust me, not everybody knows it's a work. And I'm like,
wow.
There's still people that buy it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny. I shared this with our last interview. We had a wrestler called Strangler Smith, right? Now, he was a big guy, and he used to wear a mask, but it had no eyes, no holes for the mouth or anything. So he tied it up with a rope round here, so it looked like a hangman's hood. In the ring, all you would see was and he couldn't breathe properly, right? And he couldn't see hardly. Like, he was a crazy guy, right? And he used to have this thing. He'd get on the corner of the rope before the match started, and he'd just do a big splash. But the ring he did it in one night, he didn't realize there was no spring in it, and it just was concrete. So he hit it, knocked himself out, and everyone's waiting for him to get up, but he was unconscious.
Oh my God. I don't believe I've ever worked in a ring that had a spring in it. Never.
That's hard, right?
Our practice ring at the studio had a spring, had a coil.
It did?
Yeah. What?
Oh, well, then I stand corrected. I didn't know it did. But the show ring. Andy, you'll love this one. You'll love this one. So the ring we used in the movie, Chris and I had to buy that because we couldn't find anybody that had a 20 by 20 ring. So we needed a big ring to fit all the camera equipment and the zombies and all that stuff. So Chris and those guys built the ring, and it was the hardest ring I've ever been in. And it was because it was so big, when you would run the ropes, the floor would bounce. So if you went to take a back bump, like say from a clothesline or an elbow or something, as you're coming down, the ring was coming up. The ring floor was coming up to meet you, and it would knock out of you. And by the time we were done shooting that wrestling match at the beginning, he and I were crippled. We couldn't move. And we hadn't been in the ring in years and years anyway. You know, we're both pushing 50 at the time. We're 52 now. But we were dying, man. I couldn't even move. I could barely get up off the canvas afterwards. That thing was like, I'm like, what'd you guys do? Pour concrete in here?
It was fine if you were just taking a regular bump. Like if you were just standing there and you took a bump. But if you were doing anything that involved running,
it was still pretty stiff though. Even taking a
it was stiff.
Standing bump. It was pretty stiff. And of course, the guys we were working with were actors and not wrestlers. So like to get them to not, crank the. It was like, okay, relax. This is the work, It's cranking on you, grinding on you.
It's a tough game. Like when you got it, it's okay when you're wrestling, but when you're doing it for 2 months at a time, every day, 12 hours a day, working stuff out, man, it's a killer.